Greetings, drowsy spirit. Tonight, I will tell you a story that will help you fall asleep soundly. Remember to subscribe for more bedtime stories and like the video before we start. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is in the comment section. I would also love to know what story you would want to hear next. I didn't give terror much thought as a child. Back then, my world was straightforward. Sports on the weekends, school throughout the week, and any opportunity to spend time outside were all gifts. One night from my early years, however, has stuck with me. It took place in the fall of 2006 when I was 11 years old and living in Maple Hollow, a little hamlet in North Carolina. My family owned a large home on the outside of the neighborhood back then. The backyard was enormous, but the property wasn't particularly nice. Thick forest that appeared to stretch forever surrounded 2 whole acres. That yard was a dream come true for children like myself. With so much open space, you could set up any sport, and we had a trampoline and an above-ground pool. Baseball, football, soccer, you name it. My pals enjoyed visiting. Being the child with the backyard was something I really enjoyed. In retrospect, I believe that's a contributing factor in the night's lingering effects on me. What should have been a sanctuary of safety, where we would always play and laugh, became something straight out of a nightmare. 3 males from my school were my closest buddies at the time. The daring one, Noah Grayson, is always the first to propose an absurd idea. Sometimes it was difficult to determine if he was being serious or joking because of his vivid imagination. Morton Caleb, thoughtful and quiet, but the kind that took in everything. Caleb was the first to notice that something didn't feel right. Dylan Price, who is larger than the others, protective and athletic. In any circumstance, you wanted him on your side. And suddenly Landon Pierce, was there. I was the one who connected us. It was at my residence. I enjoyed hosting, and my parents were relaxed enough to let us run amok in the yard. I invited them to a camp out in the backyard that Friday in September. It seemed like the ideal plan to my parents. My dad even pulled out an extra lantern for us because he liked the idea of us learning to be a little independent. By 5 o'clock, everyone was at my house. The sun was still up. The air had that crisp fall bite to it, and the yard seemed endless under the orange glow of late afternoon. We set up 2 tents, one for Noah and me, and one for Caleb and Dylan. After that, we played hockey until we were exhausted and sweaty, and then baseball until we were bored. You guys set up your tents before dark and don't keep the neighbors awake, my mom said half-jokingly as she placed a couple of frozen pizzas on the counter. We were starving by the time the pizzas came out of the oven. The best part of sleepovers is when your parents don't make you eat salad first, Noah said, biting into a greasy slice. Speak for yourself, Dylan said, laughing. My mom always cuts up carrot sticks no matter what we're eating. We all laughed, the kind of simple laughter that only 11-year-old can have. And for a while, everything was great, but everything changed when the sun set and the yard lights came on. That was the unwritten rule. When it got dark, we played manhunt, which was essentially hide-and-seek mixed with tag. With the exception of the house, the entire yard was open, and the back porch door served as our safe haven. Noah and I were the hiders for the first round, and we quickly separated. From there, I could see the other kids moving and hear the crunch of leaves under their sneakers as they searched. My heart pounded as it always did during that game. Half nervous, half excited, but then something broke the rhythm. From the side of the house where the trash cans were lined up, I heard one clattering as if it had been hit hard, and a second later, the motion sensor light on that side flicked on, causing the grass to turn pale white. My throat dried up, so I crawled out from under the trampoline and ran straight for the others. Game's off. I froze, thinking maybe Dylan or Caleb had gone that way. But I knew the rule of the game. Hunters always blew the whistle before starting, and I hadn't heard it. I squinted into the glare and saw someone. Not Dylan, not Caleb, who was taller, thinner, and dressed in dark clothing. The figure walked quickly toward the woods, then vanished between the trees. I yelled breathless. What? Already? Noah became irritated. Someone is out there. I stammered. By the bins. Tall guy. He went into the woods. Dylan frowned. Was it your dad? No, it wasn't him. We ran inside and told my dad. He grabbed a flashlight and stomped through the yard, calling out, "Hey, whomever is out here, you need to leave now." When he returned after a bit, He shook his head and stated, "Probably just some teenager cutting through," after checking the street and shining his light through the woods and finding nothing. We tried to settle in with video games, but I kept thinking about that tall figure sneaking into the woods. Around midnight, Noah nudged me while Caleb and Dylan were using the PlayStation, and he whispered, "We should still camp out." "Are you crazy?" I asked. "Come on, the tents are already up. Your dad is asleep. What are the odds that guy is still hanging around?" My mom nodded firmly, and she had already pulled out blankets for us to use in the living room. We were sneaking back outside with our sleeping bags 15 minutes later, trying not to wake my parents. The night air was colder, the woods were darker than before, but the yard felt familiar enough that our nerves subsided. Noah and I zipped into our tents, Caleb and Dylan in the other, and for a while we joked through the fabric walls, hurling insults back and forth, our laughter cutting into the silence, until finally the chatter died, and then I heard it, first faintly, the grass shifting under cautious footsteps, then closer right outside our tent. I sat up, heart pounding, and the zipper slowly slid down, teeth unclasping one by one. A man who appeared to be older than my dad, with thin hair, eyes shaded by the lantern light, and a taut jaw as if he hadn't smiled in years, was staring in his face, but it wasn't his. "What are you boys doing out here?" I remained immobile for a while until I understood that this was not someone I knew. "Dad," I cried, my voice breaking, and Noah rushed up next to me, screaming as well. The man reached halfway in, clutching for my ankle. I kicked hard, and Noah thrashed against him, but the man's grip slipped and he backed out, muttering something under his breath, and ran into the darkness. "Run!" he screamed. His hand was powerful and harsh. My dad was already coming down the stairs in jeans and a t-shirt with a baseball bat in his hand. "What happened?" "The man was in our tent," I screamed. Caleb and Dylan had already unzipped theirs, wide-eyed and scared, and we ran for the porch, slamming the back door behind us. My dad rushed in the yard, bat up, and yelled into the darkness, "Come back here if you've got the guts," while I choked out, "Present yourself." We heard his voice echo and then fade from the living room. My mom was on the phone with 911, her hands shaking as she explained. The yard was deserted by the time the police arrived, with the tent sagging in the grass and its zippers hanging open. The officer took my statement and carefully recorded everything in his notebook. He nodded, but made no promises, only saying that they would keep an eye out. That night, we slept inside, the four of us huddled together on the floor of the living room, too shaken to joke. We jumped at every sound outside, including a car door slamming and a branch snapping. By morning, the yard appeared normal again, with sunlight streaming across the trampoline, the pool, and the tents, almost as if nothing had happened, but I couldn't get rid of the memory of that man peering in and clutching my ankle. We never camped in my backyard again, and I'm still not sure who that man was or what he wanted. Perhaps he was a drifter, perhaps he lived in the woods, or perhaps he had been watching us for longer than we thought. All I know is that one night in Maple Hollow, the place that always felt safe, the place that was ours, wasn't safe at all. My life at the time, I didn't think much about danger. I grew up in a small town called Redcliffe, New Hampshire, where most of us knew each other by name, and parents still let their kids run loose until nightfall without worrying. My parents were protective but not overbearing, and they didn't hesitate when I asked to spend the night at my friend Marissa's house one Friday night in late September of 2019. Marissa had recently moved into an old two-story house deep in the woods. It wasn't one of those new homes neatly tucked away in a subdivision, but rather a place with history, faded green shutters, a long gravel driveway, and a cliff in back from which, if you stood at the right angle, you could see the ocean of Blackthorn Cove. The ride to Marissa's was lengthy. My mom drove me through winding back roads with trees on both sides, no street lights, and a quiet where you could hear your own breathing. "You've got your phone, right?" she asked as we pulled into the driveway. For weeks before it was all we talked about at lunch. Middle school drama felt so big back then, with crushes, friend fights, and who sat with whom at the cafeteria table. I couldn't wait to stay up all night and vent about it. "Yeah," I replied, holding it up as she asked. "All right. And don't forget to give me a call if you have any strange feelings." Marissa's house was even more eerie up close. with the front porch creaking under my shoes and the windows reflecting nothing but blackness from the forest. I rolled my eyes a little, but I'll be okay, Mom. It's just Marissa's still. She stayed in the car after I got out, waiting until Marissa came to the door to wave before she pulled away. Looking back, I sometimes wonder if she had that same gut feeling I would later. Talia was already there, sprawled out on the living room floor with a mound of blankets. Finally, she said, tossing a pillow at me. We've been waiting forever, she continued. There are boxes stacked in the hallway and mismatched furniture. Marissa's mother greeted me cordially and said that pizza would be here shortly. Marissa grinned and said, don't blame her. My mom said there are like moose and coyotes on these back roads. I wouldn't want to drive fast either. I laughed and dropped my bag. Sorry, my mom drives like a grandma. We made camp in the living room, with pillows all over the place and blankets in it for a while. It felt like any other Friday night. We played truth or dare, laughed too much over TikToks, gossiped about the people in our class who seemed to live for drama. And when the clock struck almost 11, the energy in the room changed. That restless kind of boredom set in, the kind that makes you want to do something crazy just to break the lull. When the pizza finally arrived, we devoured it while blasting music from Marissa's phone. Talia suggested that we take a 10-minute walk down the road. Talia pushed, come on, it's not like we're sneaking out. We'll stay together. Marissa bit her lip. I don't know. My mom might say no. Ask her. To our surprise, her mother shrugged, stay on the road. Don't go wandering off and don't take too long. It's late. That was all we needed. The gravel road stretched in front of us, surrounded by tall pines that obscured the sky. The air had that salty, wet edge that always drifted in from Blackthorn Cove at night. Our flashlights made little circles in the darkness, but there was nothing else. At first, it was exciting. We laughed too loudly, daring each other to run ahead and whispering scary stories to frighten each other. However, after 10 minutes, we stopped laughing because we weren't alone. I saw him first, a man approaching us from the other side of the road. At first, I thought it was nothing because people always walked at night. We passed him without a word, but the more we looked, the less sense it made. He was wearing a heavy, padded jacket, the kind you'd wear in January, but it was almost 60 degrees outside, and we were sweating in hoodies. His hood was up, covering most of his face, and the smell hit us first. It was foul, like rotting trash left in the sun, like something dead. I covered my nose and gagged. Jesus, Talia muterid, stumbling si device, Marissa whispered. Oh my God, what the hell is that smell? Holding our breath until we believed we were clear, we rushed past. I firmly stated, let's just go back, as Talia ran to the tree inn, dry heaving. Really, I don't like this. Everyone agreed without question, but we had to pass him again on the way back, and when we looked over our shoulders, he was now following us instead of walking in the same direction. Our steps accelerated, and the gravel crunched beneath our sneakers. I tried to breathe evenly, but my chest felt constricted. Is he? Marissa whispered. Yes, I growled. We walked more quickly, and he walked more quickly. We then began to jog, and he did the same. Run, Talia screamed. We bolted, my lungs burned, my heart hammering. I risked a glance back and saw him sprinting now, arms pumping, something metallic catching the faint beam of my flashlight. It looked like a knife. Go, go. We shrieked as we tore, and I yelled. We continued running until we reached Marissa's house, where we stumbled inside, slammed the door, locked it, and collapsed in the living room, gasping for air. We were afraid that her parents wouldn't believe us, or worse, that they would blame us for sneaking around. So we made a silent agreement. We wouldn't say anything. Not tonight. But the night wasn't over. It was almost 2 a.m. By the time we had calmed down enough to watch a movie, I wanted to watch something scary because, for some reason, that was safer than silence. The house faced Blackthorn Cove, so the entire backside was lined with large glass windows, and Marissa had warned us that at night, deer would occasionally approach them directly. I told myself that when I heard footsteps outside the window where I was sitting, it was probably the deer, but when I put my face to the glass, I saw nothing but black. I swear I heard something, I whispered. Probably the deer, Marissa muttered, keeping her eyes fixed on the screen. and I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to, but my stomach twisted. The night dragged on, and by 3 a.m., Marissa and Talia were asleep, but I couldn't. Every creak in the house made me nervous. The moonlight flickered across the waves below the cliff, and I saw movement, just a flicker, in the trees. I reached for a flashlight, but I'm glad I didn't because when the beam struck the tree end, I saw him again. This time without his bulky jacket, with his pale chest gleaming in the light. Throat closed, I dropped the flashlight. Marissa said, "Talia, wake up," and she stirred groggily, saying, "What? What is it? Look out there." But when she looked, he was gone. "You're imagining things. Stop trying to freak me out," Talia moaned, rolling over and pulling the blanket over her head. I sat awake, trembling, until the knock came at 4:30. I froze when I heard 3 slow knocks on the front door. Every cell in my body told me not to move or answer, but I couldn't help myself, so I crept to the peephole and found no one. I staggered back, my heart racing, and covered myself with a blanket as if that thin fabric could protect me. Eventually, exhaustion overcame me, and I fell into a restless sleep, but as soon as I got inside, I sat up in the dark, bile rising in my throat, and I whipped my flashlight around. I screamed, and the man in the room's corner watched. Talia and Marissa sprang to their feet, joining my shrieks, and he ran out the back door into the woods, just like before Marissa's parents hurried down the stairs. We told them everything while crying. An hour later, Marissa's mother called the police, and her dad grabbed his shotgun and stormed out into the night. The police searched the area, initially finding nothing, but a week later, we learned that the old shed down the road, the one we had dared to approach earlier in the night, had been searched. I never went to another sleepover again, and sometimes when the wind shifts just right, carrying that sharp, salty air from the cove, I swear I can still smell it. That sickly, rotting stench. The reminder of what was waiting in the woods. I was 13 the first time I stayed over at my friend Caleb's house, and I still remember how the place unsettled me before I even stepped inside. Inside were 5 bodies in various stages of decay. The jacket, the smell, his silence. We were seconds, maybe inches away from being added to that shed. The house was a towering Victorian with steep gables, heavy shutters, and a wraparound porch that seemed to creak even when no one was standing on it. My dad muttered, "Looks like something out of a horror movie," when he dropped me off that Friday evening, and he wasn't wrong. The place had a weight to it, like history pressing in from every angle, and even in daylight, the air inside felt colder than it should have been. The foyer smelled faintly of dry wood and something metallic, almost like rust. My sneakers squeaked against the polished floorboards as Caleb waved me inside. Eli and Marcus were already upstairs when Caleb said, "You're late," his brown hair sticking up in all directions as if he hadn't bothered to brush it. "We're ordering pizza later, but first you gotta see the attic." I put my backpack down slowly. "The attic?" "Yeah." Caleb lowered his voice as if it were a secret. "It's locked. My parents told me not to mess with it. But guess what? I found the key that was Caleb everywhere." The upstairs hallway was lined with faded florals. Wallpaper and heavy wooden doors lined both sides, each one looking more like it belonged in a museum than a home where children actually lived. The floor creaked under our weight as we walked, making it sound like someone was following us a bit too closely. By the time we got to Caleb's room, Eli and Marcus were sprawled across the carpet with an open bag of chips between them. At last, Marcus said, throwing a handful into his mouth, "We thought you chickened out." "Chicken out of what?" I asked, lowering myself next to them. Caleb smiled and held up an antique brass key, a heavy-looking key that looked like it belonged in old castles. "The attic," he said. Eli sat up. Caleb shrugged and said, "Dude, I thought your parents said not to mess with it." "They don't even go up there," he said, "and I don't think they've been inside since we moved in." Eli and Marcus looked at each other, and Marcus grinned. "Yeah, all right. Let's do it." My stomach nodded, and we waited until Caleb's parents went to bed. Caleb slipped the key into the lock, and the click reverberated louder than it should have. And when he pushed the door open, the smell hit us first. Dust, mildew, and something faintly sour. The entire house fell silent, with every floorboard sounding 10 times louder. We cautiously walked down the hallway, being careful not to step too hard. The attic door was at the very end of the hall, and it appeared older than the others. The wood was darker, and the handle was scratched. We entered the attic slowly, the air heavy with dust that stuck to the back of my throat, my sneakers crunching over pieces of plaster scattered across the floor, the ceiling sloping low on both sides, the room packed with old furniture covered in yellowing sheets, and stacks of boxes lined the walls, each labeled in faded handwriting. "This is kind of creepy," Eli murmured. Caleb swung the beam in the direction of the distant wall. We saw at that point a mask, long and narrow, with hollow eyes and a thin, eerie grin. It hung on a nail that was precisely centered on the wood-carved boards. Even though the paint was faded and chipped, the expression was piercing, as if it understood something we didn't. Marcus mumbled, "Well, that is really eerie." Something about the mask felt purposeful, as if it were waiting for us, and I felt my gut clench. Caleb laughed uneasily and said, "Probably just something the old owners left. It appears to be garbage." Eli leaned closer and asked, "Yeah, then why is it hanging up like that?" We didn't respond, and after a few minutes of searching through boxes and pretending that the mask wasn't bothering us, we closed the attic door and returned to Caleb's room. During that time, I couldn't get rid of the feeling that we had gone too far, as if the air itself had become heavier. After opening that door, we tried to divert our attention with junk food and horror films, but things didn't feel right. Caleb was quieter than normal, and Eli kept looking at the hallway. Marcus was the only one who didn't seem to mind, too engrossed in the film to notice. By the time it was past 2 in the morning, we were exhausted. Caleb's room was large enough for all of us, and he had a bed, while the rest of us spread our sleeping bags across the carpet. The house had fallen into a deafening silence, the kind that makes you hear things. At first, I assumed it was just the house settling, because old houses always make noise. I held my breath, straining to hear, but the sound was too steady, too deliberate, like fingers drumming lightly on wood. The tapping got louder, closer, and then stopped. I rolled onto my side, trying to convince myself it was nothing, but then I felt the prickling on the back of my neck and the sense that someone was watching me. I opened my eyes slowly, and there was a tall, still figure wearing a mask in the corner of the room. The hollow eyes glowed faintly in the dark, intent on me, and the crooked grin stretched wide. Then Caleb moved in his bed, mumbling something in his sleep, and the figure disappeared. I remained awake the rest of the night, staring at that corner, waiting for it to return. My heart pounded so hard that it made my entire body ache. Every creak of the house made me jump. When sunlight finally made it into the room, everything looked normal. The corner was empty. I tried to scream to wake the others, but nothing came out. My chest tightened like something was pressing down on it. Marcus dismissed it with a laugh. "Dude, you were half asleep. You imagined it." Eli didn't laugh. Instead, he appeared pale. I felt like someone was in the room, too. Caleb remained silent, his jaw clenched, and then he said in a low voice, "I feel like something's watching me sometimes when I'm in here." I believed it to be my imagination. Before I departed that morning, we all went back up to the attic. I have no idea why. Perhaps to convince ourselves of something. The mask was still hanging on the wall, just as we had left it. The smile sharper in the daytime. Somehow, we didn't touch it. We vowed never to discuss it again, locked the door, and closed it. I still dream about it, though. The grin, tapping, and lifeless eyes were waiting for me in a dark room's corner. And occasionally, I swear, I hear that same faint tapping sound closer than it should be when I wake up in my own bed. I never considered myself to be a girl who was easily frightened. Even as a child, I rolled my eyes at folks who screamed in haunted houses or spooked at shadows because I didn't like to be dramatic. However, even as an adult, I can't help but think about what happened the night of that sleepover at my friend's house when I was just 13. My universe was quite small at the time. I resided in a peaceful suburban area outside of Manchester, New Hampshire. Although they were rather strict, my parents, who were teachers, trusted me enough to allow me spend weekends at my best friend's house. Claire was that best friend. We had been friends since the 2nd grade. Everyone said they were inseparable. Just being around her gave me more courage because of her daring nature. Claire's parents were laid back, and not overbearing. Her father was a contractor who frequently traveled for work, and her mother was a nurse who worked irregular hours. The majority of the neighbors kept to themselves in their large two-story colonial home on a Trean Street. When the adults were gone, the house usually seemed a bit too large. However, we perceived it as freedom that evening. It was just before Halloween in late October. There was a biting chill in the air outside, a sign that winter would soon arrive. Claire extended an invitation to 2 additional schoolgirls. Emily, a quieter, softer-spoken girl who chuckled uncomfortably at horrific stories but still wanted to fit in, and Rachel, who shared our love of horror films. We spent time together in Claire's basement. It wasn't eerie. It was comfortable, if nothing else. The carpet was soft despite being worn in. There was a huge sectional couch that could comfortably accommodate the 4 of us, and the walls were painted a warm brown. We would lay snacks on the low coffee table in front of the ancient TV, drag down sleeping bags, and stack them with pillows. Claire's parents informed us on Friday night that they would be leaving for dinner with friends in Boston and wouldn't return until around late. Claire simply waved them away with her as they urged us to keep the door secured. As usual, yeah, we'll be fine. We had already seen the majority of a corny horror film by 9 o'clock. The kind where we laughed more than we screamed because the monster was so obviously a guy wearing makeup. We challenged one another to watch the jump scares without hiding our eyes while stuffing ourselves with popcorn and gummy worms. The night changed after the film concluded. Rachel responded, "Okay," as she stretched across her sleeping bag. "You know what that means? Ghost stories." "Well, here we go," Emily moaned, drawing her blanket up over her shoulders. "Don't act like you don't love it," Claire said, smiling teasingly. "You're the one who asked me last week if I knew any real ones about this town." "I didn't," Emily protested, her cheeks flushing pink. "Yes, you did," Claire shot back. "Fine, but we're keeping the lights dim." "No," turning everything off. We settled into the glow of one lamp in the corner. The basement felt a little less safe for the first time all night. Rachel began with a story about the old cemetery by the highway, the one that people swore was haunted by a woman who died in a fire. We half laughed, half shivered as she whispered about footsteps in the grass and shadows that moved when no one else was around. I was leaning forward, fully invested, when I heard it, a faint creak like the sound of a floorboard underweight. We continued, layering story after story, voices dropping low and dramatic, but a half hour later the sound came again, louder this time, a sharp groan from directly above us. This time, everyone heard it. Rachel's eyes flicked toward the ceiling. Emily tucked herself tighter into her blanket. Claire forced a laugh, and I dismissed it as old house noises because the others didn't seem to notice. Claire's place was decades old. We tried to ignore it, but the mood was ruined. Every little sound seemed to be amplified, including the faint rattle of the furnace and the hum of the refrigerator upstairs. I told myself I was being silly, but the hair on my arms wouldn't lie flat. Then we heard it. Voices, low and muffled, 2 of them. Rachel frowned. That sounded like footsteps. No one argued, but no one agreed either. Emily whispered. "Shoo," Claire hissed. We held still, straining to make out the words. One voice was sharp, irritated, almost angry. The other was calmer, quieter, but insistent. They weren't Claire's parents. We didn't know any of them. "Isn't that outside?" "Maybe on the porch," Rachel said, her voice trembling. But before anyone could respond, there was a loud thud in the living room right above us. It was the distinct sound of something being firmly put down, and my entire body tensed. Claire's eyes shot to the stairs as I murmured, "They're in the house," my throat scratchy. "My phone is on the kitchen counter upstairs." We'd all thrown them on the counter when we got in, and mine was there too. Emily whimpered, and Rachel put her hand over her mouth. Then, heavy, deliberate footsteps began to move from room to room upstairs, and we huddled together on the couch, holding each other's arms so tightly that it hurt. My heart was thumping so loudly that I swore whoever was upstairs could hear it. Another creak, followed by a muffled but clear curse word. Rachel mouthed, "They're looking for something." The voices moved toward the kitchen, and we could hear chairs shifting and drawers opening. They weren't just walking, they were searching. Then, 3 sharp knocks rattled the front door, and we all jolted. The voices upstairs abruptly stopped, and then there was another knock that was louder. Rachel's face brightened with hope, and she said, "It's the cops. Someone must have called." We listened, every nerve tensed as the front door opened, followed by a few muttered words, quick, fading footsteps, the door closing again, and silence. It seemed like forever before Claire's phone rang, and we ran up the stairs together, our fear overcome by a desperate sense of relief. Claire grabbed the phone off the counter and struggled to answer, and her mother's calm but urgent voice said, "Are you okay? Are the girls okay?" "Mom, what?" We tried to describe what it was like to be trapped down there, listening to strangers move just a floor above us, but the words never came close. Her mom interrupted her, and the neighbor called the police after spotting two men sneaking around the side of the house. The officers caught them outside and told her not to open the door for anyone until we got there. I felt my knees go weak, and the air rushed out of me like I'd been holding my breath for an hour. Her parents finally came home, and they gave us such a tight hug that it felt like they had lost us in the first place. I never gave superstition or ghosts much thought growing up because my parents weren't religious, and we weren't the kind of family to watch ghost hunting shows or tell scary stories around campfires. Instead, I thought of them as cheap thrills, the kind of thing people invented because real life was already boring enough. Decades later, I can still hear that muffled argument, and I can still see Celia's pale face in the dim basement light. People always say that ghosts or monsters are the scariest things, but that night taught me that real fear isn't made up. I was the awkward new kid sitting alone at lunch at Cedarbrook High after my dad moved us across the state for a job change, and I didn't know anyone at first. Ryan was one of the first people to actually talk to me. He was tall and lanky, with a smile that seemed effortless, untidy black hair that never seemed brushed, and a way of making you feel like you'd known him for years after his 5 minutes. We clicked right away, playing video games together, exchanging playlists in math class, and eventually hanging out after school. His house became a second home to me, especially since my parents were constantly busy. His mom worked late shifts at the hospital, and his dad was a long-haul truck driver, gone for days at a time, so it was usually just Ryan and his younger sister, Chloe. I had visited his place many times before. It was a 2-story older house on the outskirts of town. It wasn't falling apart, but it wasn't modern either. Creaky stairs, peeling wallpaper at the corners, the slight smell of old wood that clung to your clothes after you left. And his room was in the half-finished basement, which was where he liked to play games all night without his mother hearing the TV. So, when he invited me over for a sleepover one weekend in November, I didn't hesitate. I packed a hoodie, a sleeping bag, and a change of clothes in a backpack and rode over after dinner. That night began like all the others. Cross-legged on the carpet in the basement, controllers in hand, trash-talking like fools while destroying each other in a fighting game. "Dude, you can't just spam the same combo," Ryan grumbled after I defeated him for the 4th consecutive round. "Maybe if you learned how to block," I shot back, laughing. "Chap, absolute garbage." He tossed his controller onto the couch dramatically. We switched to horror movies after that. One of those old, grainy slashers with bad special effects that made us laugh more than scream. Between the popcorn, sodas, and terrible dialogue, it was just the usual teenage night. Around midnight, Ryan muted the TV and leaned back against the couch. "So, he said, scratching the back of his neck. "Before we pass out, I should probably tell you something." "What? You snore?" "My mom says I used to do a lot as a child, but it still happens occasionally. Sleepwalking. I know it's not like I'll hurt anyone, but I don't know." I already assumed he smirked, but I didn't laugh. "No, really. I occasionally do weird __ when I'm asleep." "Weird how?" "I walk around, sometimes talk." We unrolled our sleeping bags on opposite sides of the room, turned off the lights, and settled in. I don't know how long I'd been asleep when I woke up, but it couldn't have been later than 3. The air felt heavy still, and for a few seconds I couldn't figure out why I was awake. I found my cousin eating raw Pop-Tarts out of the box after he chuckled, but there was something in the way he avoided my eyes, like he wanted to say more but didn't. I didn't press. When I opened my eyes, I initially believed it was just the shadows playing tricks. The basement was dark, with only the orange glow of the street light leaking through the partially covered window. But as my eyesight adjusted, I saw Ryan standing close to the far wall facing me. He was motionless, with his arms hanging at his sides, and his eyes were open, but they were empty. I whispered to Ryan, "Ryan," but he didn't respond, didn't even blink, and I sat up slowly, my heart thumping. I told him, "Don't wake them suddenly." I cleared my throat and said, "You good, man?" That's when he spoke. "You shouldn't be here." His voice didn't sound like his. It was low, flat, and cold, almost mechanical. My stomach nodded, and I forced a weak laugh. "Yeah, good one. Real funny," I said, but he didn't move. "Don't startle them." I didn't smile. After a few seconds of indescribable silence, he turned abruptly and left the basement, his footsteps echoing up the stairs. I sat there frozen, my breath loud in the silence he left behind. A part of me wanted to run after him, but the bigger part of me wanted to stay exactly where I was. Eventually, I made myself get up, reaching for my phone for light. The upstairs hallway was quiet, and when I looked inside his bedroom, I saw him lying in bed, sound asleep, breathing steadily. I stood there for a while, my heart racing, trying to convince myself that what I had witnessed was simply sleepwalking. I crawled back into my sleeping bag, but I didn't sleep much after that. Ryan woke me up by throwing a pillow at my head, saying, "Dude, you passed out hard." He laughed and went to the bathroom, and I stared at him, unsure what to say, until he returned, brushing his teeth, and I saw something that made my stomach drop. His arm. There were faint, finger-shaped bruises on it, as if someone had grabbed him violently. "Dude," I said, trying to sound casual, "what happened to your arm?" He scowled as he looked down. He shrugged, rubbing at the marks. "Maybe I smacked on the door frame or something. Doesn't hurt." I hesitated, then said, You were acting kind of weird last night." His face changed. "What do you mean?" "You were standing by the door, just staring, and you said you shouldn't be here." "Strange. I don't remember hitting it on anything." "Are you sure? It looks like someone grabbed you." The rest of the day was uneventful. We played games, but the usual banter was absent. He was quieter, distracted, and I kept catching him looking at the basement door, as if he were afraid of it. Ryan froze, and the color left his face. I said that. "Yeah, I assumed it was sleepwalking." He shook his head slowly. "That doesn't sound like something I'd say." I promised I wouldn't. But the image of him standing there, his voice not quite his own, stayed burned in my mind. 3 days passed before I heard from him again. It was a text at midnight. "Are you awake?" "Yes," I said. "What is going on?" "I keep dreaming of hallways," he wrote after pausing. "Ones that are dark. I hear murmurs." I glanced at the screen, uncomfortable, unsure of how to react. It feels like I'm standing there, but it's not me. I finally typed, "Maybe stress." He didn't respond, and when I asked him how he was feeling the next morning, he simply said, "Don't worry about it." But the next time I saw him in school, he looked worse. Pale, exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days. And when I asked if he remembered anything else from that night, he just shook his head and said, "It's better if you don't come over again." He hadn't been at school for 2 days, so I went back to his apartment against my better judgment a week later. His mother allowed me in, claiming he was in the basement. He was sitting on the couch, staring at the blank TV screen when I got down there. "Ryan," I said, and he turned his head slowly, as if it took effort, his eyes bloodshot. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered, and this time it wasn't robotic or flat, but scared. Before I could answer, his body jerked like a puppet pulled by invisible strings, and his arms slammed against the couch, leaving new bruises blooming beneath his skin. He gasped, clutching at his face, twisted in agony. "What the hell is going on?" I yelled as I moved in his direction. "It's not me when I sleep," he said, looking at me with tears in his eyes. "There's more here." My chest went cold. The lights flickered. Somewhere above us, Chloe screamed. I bolted up the stairs, calling her name. She was standing in the hallway, pale as a sheet, pointing toward Ryan's room. "There was someone in there," she whispered. But it wasn't Ryan. When I opened the door, the room was empty. Behind me, Ryan's voice echoed up the stairwell. "Don't look for me while it occurs. Please." That was my last night at Ryan's house, and we never spoke about it again, not directly. He changed schools the next semester, and we eventually lost contact. However, I occasionally still receive late-night texts from an unknown number that only say, "You shouldn't be here." Every time I see it, I remember that night in the basement, when his eyes seemed to be staring past me as if something else were looking out of them, and I wonder if whatever was behind Ryan that night ever truly left him. When we were kids, sleepovers meant candy, video games, and trying to stay up late enough to show that you weren't the one who fell asleep first. By high school, however, wasn't something you did much anymore. So when Jacob texted me on a Wednesday afternoon asking if I wanted to crash at his place that Friday, I hesitated, thinking he was kidding. Jacob, sleepover this weekend? Me? Sleepover? We're not 12 anymore, dude. Jacob, just like old times. That last line made me pause. I stared at the message for a long time before responding. Me? Your parents cool with that? Jacob? They won't be home going to visit my aunt. It'll be chill. His voice sounded calm, a little hesitant, and I assumed that he meant it if he asked. Perhaps it was guilt. Jacob and I had drifted apart since middle school, and I'd fallen in with kids who were louder, more outgoing. He remained more reserved and solitary, but whenever we did get together, it seemed like no time had passed at all. In retrospect, I wish I had simply made an excuse. On Friday night after dinner, my mom took me out to his house, which was about 20 minutes outside of town, off a two-lane road that cut through dense forest. By the time we turned down the gravel driveway, the sun had already set behind the trees, leaving just enough light to make the place appear skeletal and washed out. The farmhouse sat at the end of the drive, tall and narrow, with siding that had peeled to a dull gray, and a single porch light burned above the door, swaying slightly in the wind. I recall being here once on his birthday when we were younger. The room had been too large and too still even then. Call me if you need anything, my mother replied as I picked up my backpack. I murmured, yeah, but my throat was constricted. Before I even knocked, Jacob opened the door. His dark hair fell into his eyes, and he had the same tall, slender appearance as ever. With a little smile, he took a step back. Man, I thought you weren't going to show. Driveway's like a horror movie set. I chuckled. He grinned, pretty sure something was observing me from the trees. Here in the middle of nowhere, welcome. The house was warmer inside, but it still smelled strongly of the past. Dust, wood, and possibly metal underneath. The ceiling was taller than it appeared to be, and the furniture was solid but weathered. The floor creaked with each step, like if the house were releasing its breath. There was a message on the counter from his parents. Remember to lock up. No vadrins. Normal. We took our seats in the living room. He had brought out a stack of horror DVDs, blankets, and refreshments. It seemed almost normal for a time. We couldn't agree on which movie to start. Inhaled pizza and soda and laughed at the poor acting. It felt like I was 12 again for a few hours. The lights then began to flicker at around 11. Only once, but long enough for the TV to buzz back on after the room was completely dark. Old wiring, Jacob murmured rapidly. It occurs frequently. Although my skin pricked, I nodded. The house felt colder by the second film. Outside, the unrelenting wind rattled the window frames. At one time, I believed I heard footsteps upstairs. I turned to Jacob and froze. His jaw tensed, but he didn't look at me. Up there, do you have raccoons or something? I inquired. No. He spoke in a bland tone. Once more, the sound was heard. Deliberate, slow like pace. There's someone up there, dude. Not at all. Upstairs, something smashed against the wall before I could argue. The ceiling shook. With my heart pounding, I stood. I'm not going to overlook that. Jacob took hold of my arm. He had a really cold hand. Don't. What do you mean? He took a deep swallow. You'd rather not see. I felt sick to my stomach when he said it. A voice came from the stairway before I could press him. My name, clearly and tenderly stated. I turned and headed for the stairs. Up there, it's all dark. I murmured, tell me you heard that. Although Jacob's lips moved, no sound was released. He was responding in a whisper. I snarled at Jacob. Give up. I'm getting really scared of you. The voice. Returned, this time with more volume. My name was almost playfully long. I snatched up my suitcase, ran down the driveway, and ran for the door. Breath searing in my lungs, gravel crunching beneath my sneakers. I took the chance of taking one last look back at the end of the drive. With only one window dark, the house loomed against the trees. Jacob stood in that window upstairs. The only thing that had changed was his face. That night, I didn't get any sleep. I was lying awake in my room, repeating every scene while I stared at the ceiling. By daybreak, I was on the verge of persuading myself that my memory had been distorted by the darkness. My phone then buzzed. A message from Jacob's phone number. Never returned. Beneath the date, which coincides with the sleepover night. The message vanished when I blinked, as if it had never existed. I tried calling him the following day. No response. I tried once more, but it went straight to voicemail. His parents returned on Sunday. They asked my mother over the phone if I had seen Jacob. He wasn't home when they got back, apparently. There was nothing on his bed. He had his shoes near the entrance. On the counter was his phone. The police arrived. A search was planned. The woods were searched by volunteers. Nothing. I lied when people asked me when I had last seen him. I mentioned that we stayed up late watching movies. And at about 2 in the morning, I departed. How could I have mentioned the text, the voice, or the way he'd spoken back to something I couldn't see? Weeks went by. Flyers were posted by his parents. Vigils by candlelight were held. His vacant desk at school served as a reminder that nobody wanted to see. Theories were whispered. He fled. In the woods, he lost his way. He injured himself. Nobody criticized the house. However, a few children made vague allusions to it. I stayed apart from everyone. My grades declined. It was impossible to sleep. I heard it again each time I closed my eyes. From the shadows came my name. A month later, I made the error of looking through the camera roll on my phone one evening. Amidst hazy pizza photos and foolish selfies, there was a picture I couldn't recall shooting. It was of the living room, angled toward the staircase, and my name and the date of the sleepover night were faintly scratched into the wall behind me, just visible in the flash. What happened to Jacob is still a mystery to me. Nothing was ever discovered by the cops. The house was eventually sold by his parents. Now empty, it sinks farther within itself every season. At night, children challenge one another to sprint up to the porch, but the majority never make it past the driveway. Sometimes I do. Staring at the window upstairs, I stand at the edge of the trees. And each time I swear, I see him standing there, waiting as if he's still calling my name in a whisper, as if he's still anticipating my return. I never imagined that a single weekend getaway would permanently alter my perspective on people. In the summer of 2019, I was 27 years old and employed in risk management for a major Manhattan bank. It was a stable work, but it was not glamorous. Furthermore, the office itself wasn't the finest part because of the type of individuals I worked with. It was the joyous hours that followed. We would swarm midtown bars every Friday after the markets closed, with half the office crammed into dim Irish pubs, laughing too loudly while sipping pints of Guinness. I got no Dorian Hale there. He came from our Boston office as a transfer. Tall, broad-shouldered, and in his early 30s, he was the type of man that attracted attention right away. Dorian spoke as though each story was the most fascinating thing you had ever heard. He talked of wild parties in LA, evenings in Vegas, and backpacking across Europe. Despite the fact that most of his claims sounded a bit too polished, people paid attention to him since he claimed to know celebrities, musicians, models, and other individuals. He had a magnetic personality. At least on the surface, I liked him. It was easy to laugh and hang out with him. However, as the weeks stretched into months, I became aware of the gaps in his narratives. The specifics changed. Locations shifted. He would boast about a woman who had a disturbingly magazine cover-like voice. I started to consider him amusing, but not totally authentic. Nevertheless, he was entertaining, and sometimes that's sufficient. Dorian asked me to visit his family's condo in Clearwater Beach, Florida, that summer. He stated he and his sister were going there for a long weekend and that his mother owned it. One afternoon after work, with a big smile, he said, "Come with. It will be fantastic. It's better than sweating your ass off here with the sun, ocean, and bars." It sounded innocuous. I asked if I could bring my younger brother Caleb, when he said there was plenty of room. He was 20 years old and on summer break from college, and I believed that a trip to the beach would be beneficial for him. Dorian made a snap decision. More the merrier, of course. On a Thursday, we took the plane down. The moment we stepped outside, Tampa's air hit me like a hot, damp towel. Lyra, Dorian's younger sister, was waiting at the curb. How do people live in this humidity? Caleb said. She arrived in an ancient silver Jeep Cherokee with leather seats that were damaged. Lyra was unique. She wore a vintage Talking Heads t-shirt, her black nail paint cracked, and her dark shoulder-length hair tucked behind thick round glasses. She had a strange, piercing, yet aloof vibe that was difficult to describe. As we drove across the causeway, she offered Caleb and me a fleeting half-smile before returning to her phone scrolling. I was surprised by how wonderful the condo was. 3 bedrooms, a balcony overlooking the Gulf, and spotless white tile flooring that remained cool underfoot. The furnishings featured seashell decor, light wood, blue cushions, and a beach aesthetic. Caleb and I shared a room as Dorian and Lyra each took their own. He rolled his eyes as I quipped, "You're stuck on the couch if I meet a girl." Dorian urged that we go to the strip of bars that first night because we had arrived too late to the beach. The atmosphere was laid back despite the elderly audience, which included women wearing sundresses and retirees wearing polo shirts. It ought to have been, anyway. Dorian was unique. As soon as we sat down, he began to pound shots. He moved more loosely and laughed louder. Leaning too near, he stumbled into conversations with strangers and made advances on ladies who were obviously uninterested. At first, Caleb and I laughed it off. It was uncomfortable, yet doable. Then he went too far. When Dorian refused to leave his lover alone, a larger man approached him. Voices arose. I apologized and pulled Dorian back as Caleb and I had to intervene. The man released it, but Dorian gave me a forceful shove to the chest as we left. He mumbled, "You're a piece of __ Adrian. Are you serious now? You don't have my back." I yelled. Caleb moved to separate us. "Man, just relax." Despite Lyra's advice to calm down, Dorian hurried into the night while swore. With a groan, Lyra followed silently. I stayed behind with Caleb. We tried to decompress after finishing our beers. At the bar, 2 women who were Ohio visitors started talking. We swapped numbers and joked. They invited us to join them since they said they were going downtown later. I texted Dorian to find out where he was when we eventually made our way back to the condo. He responded quickly, returning to the condo. We thought he would be upset when we opened the door, but instead he leaped from the couch and smiled as if nothing had occurred. Still visibly intoxicated, he inquired, "So, are we going out or what?" I suggested that we relax first, perhaps later. I then brought up the girls we had met. His grin disappeared. "How many?" was his blunt question. "2, I said. Trying to be humorous, Caleb added. It was incorrect to reply, "Yeah." They even asked how he knew you. Dorian's face contorted. He jumped up and hurried to his room, slamming the door behind him. I gave Lyra a quick look. Does he always act like way? She gave me a chilly glance. As in what? Never mind. It was oppressively tense. Caleb and I withdrew to our room and discussed in whispers how strange his behavior was. I asked Dorian if he wanted to go out with us when I knocked on his door once. No answer. We ultimately chose to take an Uber downtown without them. We enjoyed ourselves with the females at the pub, but my phone kept buzzing. It was being blown up by Dorian. "You're where? Why did you abandon me here? The street is where your belongings are heading. Don't return. Why I invited you is a mystery to me." I showed the girls and Caleb. Everyone scowled. Caleb whispered, "There's a problem with him." We ended the evening early and left. Dorian was sitting in the dark on the couch, gazing at the wall when we entered. I gently asked, "You okay?" He glanced in my direction, then turned his head away. "Yes, I hope you had a good time." After that, he got up, went to his room, and closed the door. Caleb and I were lying in our bunks conversing when we heard footsteps on the wood floor outside, despite our best efforts to ignore it. They came to a halt directly in front of our door. We didn't move or talk when I murmured, "He's standing right there." Caleb whispered back, "I know." It took 5 long minutes for the footsteps to finally stop. Then we heard him chuckling to himself while chatting in the living room. I slipped over to the door and opened it just a bit. Dorian was standing in the corner, mumbling while laying his head against the wall. Then he chuckled and muttered, Adrian is such a dumbass. My stomach fell. Silently, I closed the door. Caleb and I discussed finding a motel and departing early in the morning. However, I awakened up to the creaking sound of the door about 20 minutes later. Dorian stared, peering into the darkness. I sat up and said, "What are you doing?" His hands reached for my throat as he screamed and lunged at me. Caleb pulled him away from me and tossed him into the corner, saying, "You're a piece of __. I invited you here and you ___ on me." Dorian scurried to his feet, screaming, his face contorted in anger. We didn't hold off. After a few minutes of packing, we ordered an Uber and headed to a hotel. We remained there until Sunday when we had our flight. I saw Dorian at work a few times back in New York, but he stayed away from me entirely. He transferred out in less than a month. I'm still not sure what exactly was wrong with him. I still get shivers from that night in Clearwater Beach, though. The summer that everything changed, I was 14. I discovered that one night can drastically alter one's perspective on the world that summer. When I was younger, I thought sleepovers were fun, harmless, and even an opportunity to stay up late, share secrets, eat junk food, and laugh until we were exhausted. However, I doubt that I will ever hear the word sleepover again without getting a shiver because of what transpired at Ellie Morgan's house. At the time, Ellie was 15 years old, 1 year older than me. She resided in Brookfield, Illinois, in a peaceful suburban community directly next door to us. Although our two-story homes were built in the late 70s and were almost identical, hers always felt gluier inside. Perhaps it was the heavy drapes her father always had drawn. Or perhaps it was because the place had never been complete since her mother left when she was 8 years old. Richard, Ellie's father, put in long hours in the warehouse along the interstate. He was usually exhausted and grumpy. However, he harbored affection for Ellie. He allowed her to break the rules by viewing scary shows that my parents would have grounded me for even looking at or staying up late on the weekends. My parents were strict and devout. No boys within 10 feet, no horror films, and no staying up past 11. Thus, each time I was able to, it was like entering a different planet when we stayed at Ellie's. My folks were in Wisconsin celebrating their anniversary that weekend. When Richard sat down with a beer in the Cubs game, he hardly saw us, but they trusted him to watch me. On Friday night, Ellie invited me over with the promise that we would binge-watch old VHS tapes of Buffy the Vampire Slayer that she had discovered at secondhand shop. I recall feeling as though nothing terrible could possibly happen when I walked over just before sunset with my sleeping bag slung over my shoulder. Ellie's bedroom, which overlooked her backyard, was located on the second level. Her walls were plastered with posters featuring unknown bands and phrases from films that my parents forbade me from seeing. A dilapidated VCR was connected to a little TV that was placed on top of her dresser. We set out some leftover pizza that her dad had picked up, along with popcorn and soda. Ellie smiled and popped in the first tape, saying, "This is going to be great." With trepidation, I chuckled. We're staying up all night. We pressed play, and for hours, the flickering light from the TV filled her room as vampires, witches, and monsters fought across the screen. At around 1 a.m., my eyelid began to droop, but Ellie kept nudging me awake. "Don't be lame, Kara," she whispered, using the nickname she'd given me. "All night? You think we'll make it?" She nudged me. "Of course, you're with me now. No early bedtime rules." I must have fallen asleep at some point, because the next thing I can clearly recall is waking up to a startling noise that wasn't fireworks or a car backfiring. Rather, it was violent, sharp, and so close that it felt like someone had clapped their hands inside my head. I jolted to my feet, and Ellie was already awake, gripping her blanket and wide-eyed. "Did you hear that?" We both crept to the window, but the only view was of her backyard, with the old wooden swing her dad had constructed years ago, swaying slightly in the breeze. Everything else appeared quiet, almost too calm, and I thought maybe it was outside. "That was a gunshot," she murmured. "Dad wouldn't want us moving around, so we should stay here, but my heart was beating too fast to stay put. So I told her, I'm just going to check the front window. If it's nothing, we'll come back." Ellie shook her head, but I wasn't sure I believed the words as I was saying them. The house was dark except for the faint glow of the street lights seeping through the living room curtains. When we got to the top of the stairs, I froze. There were voices, low, urgent bickering. Ellie grabbed my arm and said, "Don't," but I leaned forward just enough to look through the banister, and my stomach lurched. "You said the place would be empty, and I thought it would be. They said the daughter was staying with neighbors this weekend. So who's this guy?" Richard was lying at the foot of the stairs, his body rigid, sprawled across the tile, blood pooling beneath him, his eyes staring glassy and lifeless toward the ceiling. Ellie squeezed my arm so tightly that it hurt, something she hadn't noticed yet. Two figures were standing in the foyer, dressed in black, big duffel bags slung over their shoulders, one of them carrying a pistol loosely at his side. "We have a body now." I pulled Ellie back before she could see it. My voice trembled. "We need to hide now." "Why? What's happening? What did you see?" I swallowed hard. "I'll explain later. This is your fault," the taller one hissed. "You didn't have to shoot him. He appeared out of nowhere." "What was I supposed to do? Let him call the police." "You should have just knocked him out." Just believe me, I never imagined that one night would change the way I viewed my childhood, my friendships, and the sense of security in someone else's home. I was 16 at the time, caught in that weird transitional period between being old enough to feel like you know everything and still young enough to feel invincible. It was a Friday night in late October of 2012, and I received an invitation to spend the weekend at my friend Marcus's house. We had known each other since middle school, and Marcus was the kid who could make everyone laugh, including teachers. His home had a relaxed atmosphere because his mom frequently traveled for work as a nurse, and his dad worked nights as a truck driver, which meant fewer rules, later nights, and the kind of freedom that teenagers seek whenever they can. Marcus lived only a 15-minute walk away in a quiet neighborhood outside of Portland, Oregon, and his street was one of those half-finished developments where some houses looked lived in and cozy, but a few stood empty, their windows dark, and construction never quite finished. My parents didn't let me out for overnights very often, but they liked Marcus and thought he was responsible enough. If they had known what was going to happen that night, I doubt they would have ever let me leave the house. Marcus and another friend, Ethan, were already getting ready for the night when I arrived. Ethan was quieter and more perceptive than Marcus. I enjoyed having him around because he counterbalanced Marcus's boisterousness with something more subdued. "Finally, man," Marcus said, opening the front door as I entered. "We were about to start the movie without you." He had these keen green eyes that always seemed to notice things before the rest of us did. Tossing my suitcase down by the couch, I laughed and said, "Yeah, right. Like you'd ever wait to watch something scary without me here to see you scream first." Ask Ethan. "Scary movies don't scare me." Marcus grinned. "You literally screamed last week when a neighbor's dog barked at you through the fence," Ethan said, raising an eyebrow. Our night began with pizza boxes on the table, soda cans arranged like trophies, the glow of the television lighting up the room while shadows flickered along the walls. Marcus's house wasn't particularly eerie in and of itself. It was a two-story building, fairly standard suburban construction, but the unfinished houses across the street gave a neighborhood this eerie emptiness once the sun went down. I laughed so hard that my stomach hurt. Marcus flipped us both off and took a can of soda from the refrigerator. I didn't think much of it at the time, but Ethan kept peering out the window whenever he thought no one was looking. And when the curtains were left open, you could see the dark skeletal frame of a house half-built, like a corpse that never gained its skin. "You good?" During a break in the film, I asked him once, and he shrugged. "I thought I saw someone over there earlier," he said. "Most likely nothing." "Dude, no one lives there," Marcus said, waving him away. "For years, it has been deserted. Alex, don't bother him." "Alex, that's me." I dismissed it as well. We all thought that nothing could truly happen to us at that age. At midnight, after watching 2 scary movies, eating half a pizza each, and hearing a lot of offensive jokes, we switched to playing video games. Marcus liked the mess in the living room, with the wrappers on the floor and the soda rings on the coffee table. We were in the middle of a Call of Duty game when he abruptly stopped. "Did you hear that?" Ethan and I paused as he inquired, and the only sound in the house was the gentle hum of the refrigerator. "Heard what?" Ethan put down his controller, and I heard it too. I told myself it was the house settling, but the uneasiness had already crept into me. We got up and crept upstairs together like kids daring each other to touch a hot stove, and the hallway lights flickered slightly, which didn't help. I asked like footsteps upstairs. Marcus shook his head. No, your dad is home. He's hauling freight tonight. Won't be back until tomorrow afternoon. We went back downstairs to try to laugh it off, but something in the air had changed. It must have been close to 2 a.m. when it happened. Marcus pushed open his bedroom door and found nothing. His mom's room and the guest room were also empty. See, he said, trying to sound braver than he actually was, just the creaking of the house. Ethan didn't seem convinced. Creaks don't sound like footsteps. The front door knocked 3 times while we were half asleep on the couches, listening to a movie in the background. We all sat up steadily, and Marcus grabbed the remote control and turned off the TV. The knocking continued, and this time there were 3 slow thuds, as if someone was checking to see if we had heard them. Who the hell? It's probably a neighbor or something. Marcus grumbled as he stood up. Wait, Ethan interjected hastily. Don't just open it. Marcus rolled his eyes. When Marcus turned on the porch light at 2 a.m., I noticed that there was nobody there. Nobody's there, Marcus said, lowering his voice. I recall my throat drying up. You sure? Look for yourself. He moved aside, and I put my eye to the peephole. The half-built house across the street stood silently, its dark windows staring back. But as I turned away, a new sound came from the we paused as the scraping persisted at the kitchen's sliding rear door, like nails dragging across glass. Someone's outside, Ethan murmured. Marcus, being Marcus, tried to act tough. He grabbed a baseball bat from the coat closet. Stay here, he said, though his voice was thinner than usual. No way, man, I said, grabbing his arm. We stick together. A shadow passed behind the thin curtains that were drawn across the sliding glass door as the 3 of us slipped into the kitchen. We didn't sleep after that. By 3 a.m., we were huddled together in the living room with every light on. Marcus had locked all the doors, double-checked the windows, and even set up a chair under the doorknob like in some corny movie. Ethan's hand gripped my sleeve, but then the shadow suddenly ducked down and disappeared. Marcus yanked the curtain open and bat raised, but the porch was empty, save for the slight breeze that blew through the trees. Everything went black. Ethan cursed under his breath, my skin pricked with cold sweat, and then there were footsteps. This time, the footsteps were slow and deliberate, coming from upstairs, and Marcus's grip on the bat was so tight that his knuckles turned white. This isn't funny, he called out, his voice breaking, as the footsteps came down the stairs one by one. We didn't breathe. And then a man, short and burly and wearing black, came out of the stairwell shadows. I knew there were 3 of you, he rasped. 3 heads are better than 1. He had a long hunting knife in his fingers, and for a moment, time seemed to halt. He caught the weak moonlight flowing through the window, yellow, almost glowing. Red cells are the greatest. The man pushed forward, and Marcus swung the bat, hitting his arm. The knife clattered to the ground, and I jumped for it out of instinct, my body moving before my head could catch up. At first, we didn't even understand. The man roared, slamming Marcus into the wall. Ethan screamed for me to run, but I was unable to do so. I grabbed the knife, and when the man approached me, I pushed upward with all of my rage and fear. The blade sank into his chest, causing him to stagger backward, gasping like a wounded animal, and then collapse onto the carpet, where the blood pooled quickly. The room fell silent except for our ragged breaths. Marcus slid down the wall, trembling, and Ethan was pale and shaking uncontrollably. My hands were slick with blood, and the knife was still gripped between my fingers. I killed him. My parents pulled me out of school for a week after that, and I hardly slept, and when I did, I dreamed of yellow eyes watching me from the dark. Marcus never joked the same way again. Ethan grew quieter, more distant. And me? We called the police, our words stumbling over each other. And by the time they arrived, the man was long dead before they even checked his pulse. The police later told us that he'd been on a spree, targeting red-haired kids throughout the state. People talk about scary movies, urban legends, and ghost stories, but nothing compares to the sound of actual footsteps in a house you thought was safe, or to looking death in the eyes and realizing he chose your friend first. Until that night at Lily's house, which changed the way I looked at people, homes, and even silence itself. I never gave much thought to how fragile friendships could be. Lily had been my best friend since we were 12 years old, and by the time we were 17, we had survived the chaotic years of middle school, boy drama, summer camps, and even the strange silence of freshman year, when we both drifted for a few months before realizing no one else understood us quite the same way. Was the type of friend who always had a plan: concerts, parties, late-night horror marathons. I was more cautious, but I went along because I felt safe with her, even when she suggested things I wouldn't have done on my own. On a Friday, in early autumn, she asked me to join her for a sleepover at her new home. Her family had recently moved from a small apartment downtown to a large 2-story house on the outskirts of Maplewood, a quiet town about 30 minutes from my home. I remember being excited because Lily had blown about how spooky the house was at night and how it was ideal for scary movies. I assumed she was exaggerated, but I was intrigued. Her parents were leaving the house that weekend to visit her aunt in Chicago, so it was left to us, which felt like freedom at the age of 17. I arrived at around 6 o'clock, and Lily was already blasting music from the living room, her blonde hair pulled into a messy bun, and she had that mischievous smile that always meant she was up to something. "You're late," she teased, snatching the bag of chips from under my arm. It was just the two of us, snacks, movies, and the kind of long, meandering conversations that happen when the world outside feels paused. I said that I needed to persuade my mother that I wouldn't set the house on fire. I clarified, "She doesn't trust you. She doesn't trust us," which caused her to chuckle. I was surprised by how large the house was. It included a staircase that spiraled up to the second story like something from an old movie, broad halls, and creaking wooden floors. Upstairs was Lily's room, but she claimed that because of the large couch and the ideal television for horror marathons, we would camp out in the living room. By 8 o'clock, we had The Conjuring on TV, pizza boxes on the coffee table, and soda cans all over the floor. You know, this house is actually kind of creepy, especially the basement. "Want to see?" Lily remarked, pausing the film halfway through. I moaned, "Do we need to make some demands?" "It's included in the tour. You'll enjoy it. Anyway, it wasn't my favorite. There was a cement floor, exposed rafters, and a single bare light bulb hanging from the ceiling in the unfinished basement. The walls were lined with boxes, and a bulky oak wardrobe stood in the distant corner. It was the type that seemed to belong in an old church. I said, "What's that?" "I have no idea. It was part of the house. According to my mom, the previous owners left it, and it was too heavy to move. The dark wood, the elaborate carvings around the edges, and the way the door didn't close all the way made the wardrobe feel uneasy." I said, "Let's go back upstairs," and for a while, everything was fine. We laughed, finished the pizza, and discussed the typical teenage topics of school drama, boys we liked, and our plans for the future. At midnight, Lily pulled out a bottle of cheap vodka she had stolen from her parents' cabinet, and she smiled and said, "I thought we'd celebrate." We weren't big drinkers, but we took small sips of the soda, chasing the burn, which made us louder and sillier. At one point, Lily suggested we play a game of truth or dare. "Truth," I said on my first turn. "Boresome," she complained, and then she leaned closer. "Do you think my house is haunted?" I laughed nervously. When it was her turn, she chose dare. I told her to run to the basement, touch the wardrobe, and come back. She didn't even flinch. She grabbed a flashlight and ran down, her footsteps echoing through the floor, but she didn't return right away. I sat on the couch, waiting, listening. The house grew eerily quiet, save for the faint hum of the kitchen refrigerator. "That's not a real question," she pressed. "I mean, it feels weird. The basement especially." Her smile grew. I called out, "Lily," no answer. After a full minute had passed, the wardrobe stood in the corner, its door slightly ajar, and Lily was nowhere to be seen. "All right, this isn't funny." I tried to laugh it off, thinking she was trying to frighten me, but my chest tightened when I heard a heavy thud from beneath the floor, followed by what sounded like a scrape of wood against cement. I stood at the top of the basement stairs and called again, "Lily, stop messing around." Nothing happened, so I finally made myself go down. We went back upstairs, but the uneasiness never really left me after that. By 2 o'clock in the morning, we were sleeping on the couch, the empty vodka bottle rolling on the carpet, and the noise began. I whispered, and then the wardrobe door creaked wider. My stomach dropped. "Boo!" Lily shouted, leaping out from behind it. I screamed, almost dropping the flashlight, which made her double over in laughter. "You should have seen your face," she howled. I wanted to be mad, but relief took over me so hard that I ended up laughing too. We both paused when a subtle, purposeful creak came from the basement door. "You closed it, right?" The basement door was open, just a crack, swaying slightly, as if someone had touched it. "Maybe it's the draft," Lily suggested, though her voice trembled. We closed the door, locked it, and tried to laugh it off, but neither of us was able to turn back to sleep. At 3 o'clock, the noises began again, louder this time. I whispered. "Yeah," she said, her voice suddenly small. We sat up, staring into the darkness of the wardrobe, which was in the basement. We both knew it had been there, but when Lily turned on the lamp, there it was, standing against the far wall of the living room, its carved doors closed tight. My blood ran cold. "That's not possible," Lily whispered. We remained motionless for what seemed like an eternity, and then slowly, the wardrobe door opened, revealing a tall, thin figure that wasn't a ghost in the conventional sense. Rather, it was worse. Its eyes were hollow, empty sockets, its skin stretched too tightly over its bones, but I could still feel it staring at us. Lily grabbed my arm so tightly that her nails dug into my flesh, and she hissed, "Run!" and we ran upstairs, slamming the bedroom door behind us. I pushed a chair under the handle while Lily fumbled for her phone, but there was no service. The bars flickered and died, and the sound of dragging would followed us slowly, deliberately, as if the wardrobe was moving across the floor once more, before heavy, uneven footsteps came up the stairs. When the sunlight finally came through the window, we dared to open the door, but the hallway was empty, the wardrobe was gone, there were no scratches on the floor, and there was no indication that it had ever been in the living room. When Lily's parents came home that evening, we told them everything, and they laughed it off, saying we'd been drinking too much and that we imagined it. Perhaps they wanted to believe that. We pressed against the wall, clutching each other, and listened as the thing stopped outside the door. "The wardrobe," she said in a whisper, "is back in my room now. I never returned to that house." I haven't spoken to Lily in years. She stopped returning calls, deleted her social media accounts, and vanished. However, occasionally, late at night, when the house is too quiet, I hear a faint creak, and I can't help but wonder if the wardrobe found its way to me. Lily's family moved out without explanation within a month, and the house is still there, empty, at the edge of Maplewood. I occasionally drive past it and through the upstairs window, and I swear I see a tall shadow watching. To be honest, I always felt that stuff belonged in movies or campfire stories, not real life. However, the sleepover I had at my friend Daniel's house when I was 13 years old is the one night that still makes me question everything I thought I knew about what was real and what wasn't. Years later, I can still recall every single detail, every sound, and every flash of fear that made me feel like I was losing my sense of reality. Daniel and I had been best friends since 4th grade, and we had just moved to our neighborhood at the time, and we had bonded over video games and our shared distaste for math homework. By the time we were in middle school, we practically lived together. I knew his parents, his younger sister, and even his golden retriever. "This place is huge," I said, trying to sound impressed as I grabbed my backpack from the car. Daniel smirked. "Yeah, but it's kind of creepy at night." I had previously hosted sleepovers, but this one was different because it was the first time at his family's new house. His dad had gotten a promotion at work, so they could afford a bigger place. When I first heard that, I pictured a fancy modern home with clean lines and a flat-screen TV in every room. "You'll see." His mother claimed that the house had once belonged to a retired professor who had died a few years ago, and his family had purchased it because the price was too good to refuse. It reminded him of the kind of place people whispered about in ghost stories, and he wasn't mistaken. The interior was equally eerie, with wooden floors creaking under every step, hallways lined with old wallpaper that had yellowed over the years, and doors that were those heavy ones with brass knobs that clanked when you closed them. His parents hadn't even finished unpacking, so half the room still had stacks of boxes pressed up against the walls. We first set up in the living room, where we devoured pizza while playing video games until our eyes hurt. His little sister Emma went upstairs to bed at around 9 o'clock, and shortly after, Daniel and I were sprawled on the floor, surrounded by empty soda cans, chip bags, and a stack of candy wrappers. Daniel asked abruptly, in a low voice as if he didn't want his parents to hear, "Have you ever been up in the attic yet?" I shook my head. "Number. There's some weird stuff up there. Old trunks and mirrors, and I don't know, just creepy junk." He smiled like that, which meant he was going to force me into doing something foolish. "Bet you wouldn't stay up there alone for 10 minutes. I moaned. "Really? We're doing dares now. Come on, man. Don't tell me you're scared. It's just an attic. What's the worst that could happen?" he pressed. I wanted to say no, but based on his expression, I knew he wouldn't let me live it down if I backed out. Okay, 10 minutes, no big deal. We waited until the house was completely silent, with no creaks from his parents moving around and no footsteps upstairs. Then Daniel led me to the second-floor hallway, where a pull-down ladder was located at the very end of a square opening in the ceiling. Although the ladder was closed, I could still see faint drafts of cool air coming down from it. Daniel reached up and tugged the cord, and the ladder unfolded with a long, creaking groan. He gave me a flashlight from the kitchen drawer. "Here, you're going to need this." I tried to laugh it off, but my palms were already perspiring as I grabbed it. 10 minutes, huh? I'll keep time. Don't chicken out. I climbed the ladder slowly, each rung bending under my weight, and as soon as my head poked through the opening, a musty odor hit me hard, like a mixture of mold, dust, and something sour, almost like spoiled milk. The attic was enormous, with slanted wooden beams and a floor that creaked under my sneakers. There were boxes stacked in uneven towers, some half-collapsed, spilling out yellowed books and cracked picture frames. There was also broken furniture, including chairs without legs, a dresser with its drawers pulled out, and several old trunks with their leather peeling. I told myself it was just an attic, nothing frightening. But then my light fell on a mirror against the far wall, tall and narrow, framed in tarnished gold that was flaking in places, the glass so cloudy with grime that I could hardly see my reflection in it. But something about it drew me in, as if I had to see myself in it. The glass shimmered as I raised my sleeve to wipe the surface, not like a trick of dust, but like rippling water, and for a moment I saw something that wasn't me. A man. He was tall, thin, and wore a black suit that looked out of style like something from a century ago. "Yeah," I said, my voice cracking, and I forced myself to keep looking around, trying to shake it off. Near the mirror was a trunk with the lid slightly open, and I nudged it with my foot and the lid creaked back. His eyes were God, dark pits, no whites, no color. I staggered back, my heart pounding, and the flashlight slipped in my sweaty grip. When I looked again, it was just me staring back, pale, wide-eyed, and terrified. "Everything good up there?" Daniel's voice called faintly from below. I heard footsteps, not from downstairs. These were up here with me. Heavy, slow, deliberate. "Daniel," I called, my voice shaking. Inside were dark suits, neatly folded men's clothes, and something caught my eye beneath them, a small framed photograph. I carefully picked it up, and it showed a family, 2 parents, and a boy about my age. The glass over the father's face was cracked straight through, as if someone had smashed it on purpose. Then I saw it in the mirror, the man in the black suit standing just behind me. Closer this time, his face as pale as death, his eyes black voids that seemed to swallow the light. And I screamed, dropping the photo as I ran for the ladder. My knees scraped against the wood as I scrambled down so fast I nearly fell. I whipped the ladder up and slammed the attic door shut. No response. The footsteps stopped. I spun around, swinging the flashlight wildly, but all I saw were boxes and shadows. My chest tightened, panting. When Daniel noticed me, his smile disappeared. "Dude, what happened?" "Nothing," I finally murmured, unable to talk because my throat seemed closed. I shook my head. I knew it wasn't nothing, though. A few weeks later, Daniel informed me that his parents were selling the house, and that even after his dad searched and discovered nothing, his mom kept waking up at night, claiming to have heard someone walking upstairs. They laughed it off when they told me this. "Perhaps the house was simply too large and old," said the neighbors. "But I am aware of the reality. I am aware of what I observe in the mirror. and it wasn't acceptable.